Hello, we're here for part two of Michael Ventura on John Cassavetes. And last time we ended up with we were in Austin, we were eating lentils, and he got an offer to make a documentary for $5,000 from John Cassavetes. John Cassavetes calls him out of the blue. So why don't you pick it up from there?
Well, I was shocked. I had no idea that I figured in John's thinking at all. I had met him by this time 2 or 3 times. I'd interviewed him, as I said. I'd interviewed Jenna. I'd written the big article for LA Weekly, about 3 years before. And here John was going to do this film Love Streams. And he wanted me to be on the set, not to make a documentary, but to write a diary of it. Turned out that I did make a documentary. That was part of the story. But just pay me to be there. And I felt that, and keep notes and write a book about it. I felt honored, intimidated. He said it'll be a tough book. And he meant that. He wanted what was really going on, and not a puff piece, not publicity. And then I get paid for doing it from the producers of the film, who are an Israeli group called the Golan Company, who were doing it basically for the prestige that Cassavetes, well, he did not have prestige much in America, had great prestige in Europe and in the world film community. And Golan, the Golan brothers, wanted a share of that prestige. And to do this, even though they were a very commercial group, practically, basically just make a film quick, pay people very little, make a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's what they were doing. They were the biggest film producers at the time in Israel. But when they said they would give Cassavetes complete freedom, they were totally sincere.
Yeah.
They gave him complete freedom.
Yeah, so this is
yeah.
I was just going to give a little background. This is
Sure.
This is Golan Globus, Menachem Golan and Yoram Globus, if I remember correctly. And
Yes.
this is Canon Corporation. And Canon Corporation made mostly B movies, ninja movies. They made Breakin' and Breakin' 2, and kind of exploitation movies, I guess you could say. But they also, I guess, for the prestige, maybe because they were genuinely interested, they made a couple of they pulled some guys out of some independent filmmakers out and had them make films too. I don't think Cassavetes was the only one. I think there was a couple of guys that they did that with, where they actually tried to make some quality movies. I met them, and I thought they were very warm, grandfatherly type guys, at least in my experience. And the whole Canon offices going there was always pretty fun. But yeah, they're from Israel. They were both in the Israeli Defense Force. I think they were both veterans of the 6-Day War. But yeah, take it from there.
And so for Golan, for Canon Films, this was like a party. Here was John Cassavetes going to come in and do something in a way totally the opposite of the way they did.
Yeah.
And for me, okay, I got on a train. I got to LA. And just before I did, though, I got a call from John's secretary, Helen, And she said, John was going to call you this week, and he hasn't because his mother died. And but he says the plans are the way are as scheduled, and you should come, and everything is as you talked about. And I thought, man, what class that he'd even think at a time like that. Oh, tell Ventura I'm sorry I haven't called him. Tell him why, and tell him everything's okay with our plans. It was a mark of how John did things. He did things personally, and he was a class act in every kind of way. That's a kind of consideration you just don't expect in the film business, especially from somebody who would be on the periphery like me. So finally I got there. Principal photography had started about a week before, and most of the shoot was at John Cassavetes' house. The family was kind of kicked out. He and Jenna were there. The kids were elsewhere. On Woodrow Wilson Drive in Laurel Canyon, and off Mulholland. And it's a very strange situation because you're in the guy's house. They sleep upstairs, you know, and at the same time you've got all these people going around. And I came in at a crisis. John, who, first of all, I was kind of shocked at how he looked, because his face was very thin, but his lower abdomen bulged. I didn't know at the time that that's what it looks like when you have severe cirrhosis. And he was pale, but he had so much energy that people really didn't register it, including myself. I can look at the photographs and I can see my notes and I can see what I was seeing, but John had more energy than anybody. And so it sort of passed over that he was passed over that, my God, he really didn't look well, does he? Nobody said that. Absolutely none of us said that the whole shoot. Just that he was tired. And he'd never been tired before. But in any case, this day was a crisis. He did not like the cameraman Golan has had assigned to him. And in fact, John would be in the process of firing all the Canon people that Golan had assigned to get his people in. But he really had a beef with the cameraman that you didn't understand until you actually saw the film. I remember as I was walking into the house, oh, hi, Magdala, shakes my hand, and then suddenly he's turning around very angry and going, where the hell is all this light coming from? This is a hallway. It's a dark hallway. There isn't light. And I'm thinking, you know, certainly on TV, and especially in sitcoms, but in American movies and on TV, interiors are lit.
Yeah.
You know, if you see a sitcom, you don't see shadows. You see the slightest of shadows. Light's coming in from all over the place. There's no shadow, the serious shadow. Interiors are lit. In actual houses, interiors, you know, they have dark spaces. And those hallways were especially dark. And there was a big to-do, and the guy left. And because what John really wanted was his old friend Al Rubin, who refused to join the Cinematographers Union because he didn't like unions, is the impression I got. I don't want to be telling stories on Al. That's the impression I got. And was the producer of the film, and did not want to be the cinematographer. But John had thrown out the cinematographer. The cinematographer he wanted was the producer, Al Rubin. And that's the cinematographer he got, because underlying everything in the people who gravitated around John was the attitude, and sometimes saying so, anything for John. It was the fundamental attitude of John's circle. Anything for John. So Al Rubin became the cinematographer that day, with not only not planning to, but not wanting to. And actually, if you look at the cinematography of Love Streams, it is very daring. It uses lights. It uses light in a way of darkness. You get to the dead center of the film, and the character is in almost black, and proceeds outward to light, somewhat light. And that's part of John's conception from the beginning, that the interior of this house is dark. The interior of this man is dark. And he was telling his story in lights and darks. People don't give him credit for this. He was telling his story in lights and darks, and he always did. You go back and you look from the start, his first film, Shadows, and you see a tale of lights and darks. And when he uses brilliant color, like he does in Opening Night, you know, he's telling in Opening Night, he's telling the story of a theater and of artists. And so the colors jump out at you on Opening Night. But in the color films, the colors are dull, subsided. They don't jump out at you. And in Love Streams, what jumps out at you is the dark. John Harmon, the character that John plays in Love Streams, is dark, and John's kind of dark, and everything around. And so whatever light there is in the person of Jenna Rowlands, and in the glistening of the rain, and in the various shots of the bleached light of Las Vegas, the part that happens there, there's he doesn't call attention to it as a filmmaker, but if you're aware of it, you see that the lighting pattern is very important in the film. And he had every reason to fire this guy. This guy was not about to understand it. If you shot in a dark hallway, he wanted it to be dark. He didn't want a lot of light thrown the whole way, like a sitcom. So that's what I walked in on. And a very strange thing happened. His secretary, Helen, the script supervisor, as they call them now, said, "Oh, he's probably doing this because you're here." And I said, "I'm not that important." And I thought, I did not agree with her in the least, but I thought, John's ways of doing things are usually so dramatic that people will try to come up with all kinds of explanations for them, like, "Oh, he's probably doing this because you're here." And so John, I found to be very mysterious on the set. He also had a knack that maybe good directors have, but I've only really been around John in this kind of situation, of showing up at the place on the set during like lulls when they're setting up lights and things like that, where some conversation was going on, that may be critical of him, or maybe talking about the film, and suddenly John's there going, "What do you mean by that?" And somebody's going, like Robert Fields did, will go, "Well, John, it's just that I think." "Well, what do you think?" "I think you shouldn't go so strong over here," and get into a big hullabaloo about that. But the atmosphere of the set, John said the atmosphere directs the picture, and the director sets the atmosphere. And what he meant by that was a sense of, he instilled a sense of responsibility, if you want to call it that. Yes, I do want to call it that. Responsibility in everybody there. We were all here to make this picture. Every scene in the picture was the most important scene in the picture. And nothing was taken for granted.
It's holistic.
He would say, yes, truly. He would say things like he had to really argue to get the best catering possible for the lunches and dinners. And he said, some producers don't understand that people have to really feel like they're making a movie. And the food has to be good. They have to look forward to it. It has to be, even if it's at 3 in the morning where you're having dinner at 3 in the morning on an all-night shoot, the food has to be something you look forward to. But he'd care about all that. And at the same time, and this didn't come out till much later, so let me go back and tell you a little bit about the book. I'm keeping notes and keeping notes and keeping notes and keeping notes. You know, I always carry a notebook around with me, and I'm always writing in it. And when the film was finished, I did write a draft of this book. But John was ill, and by that time we knew he was dying. And I felt there were all sorts of things I couldn't say. And I didn't know there were all sorts of things I didn't know, even though I'd been there the whole time. And the first draft of the book, John killed with silence. He read it, never said a word about it. And the book just died. So it's years later, it's 2005. John's been dead then 16 years. And I find my notes, because I wanted to go back and do that book right. I found my notes. My notes are really good. Lots of them. But I also had, and I don't know how I got it. I think we got it when we were editing the documentary. The script, the shooting script as it had been shot. So every scene and every note was in it, but there was also in the folds of the inner flap of the notebook a memo that John had written or dictated to Helen. And there it was right there, and it told the whole story. So 3 weeks into the shoot, unbeknownst to all of us, doctors told John he had about 6 months to live. Nobody knew it. None of us. Jenna didn't know it. And right at about that time, he writes the memo where he changes, he throws out Ted Allen's script. Ted Allen, his good friend, he throws out the last 3/4 of the movie because he's shooting in sequence, so he shot the beginning. And he's rewriting every day to make the film a final statement from John Cassavetes, which it was never intended to be in the beginning. And every day he rewrites, every day he shoots, every day there's new lines. He's up, he's dying, but he's up for 20 hours a day doing this. And no one knows when he sleeps. I said 20 hours, no one knows when he sleeps. And he refashions this entire screenplay, which was going to have a whole ending, a very different ending. Diane Abbott's part was going to be much bigger in the end. In this version, she's just out in the first 20, 30 minutes. Everything changed to make it a film of John's goodbye, which is the last thing you see in the film. John waving goodbye.
I also get the impression that it was there was a lot of Jenna in it, and that it was kind of a goodbye to her, or an ode to her personality too.
Definitely. And I'm very, very glad you brought that up. Definitely. Because it was a John Jenna film, and she brings her character, who's in the midst of a breakdown. She gets to say the line that I chose for the title of the documentary, "I'm almost not crazy." And she comes to see her brother, but you don't know it's her brother. You're following these two characters. You don't know for about 45 minutes. You go from one to the other. You don't know what their relationship is. You have no idea. Are they lovers? Are they ex-lovers? Is this family? What is it? Why are we following these two people? Until Jenna shows up. And even then, it's murky until toward the end, where you realize they're brother and sister. It's confirmed. And it is this song to Jenna, in effect. It's her beautiful dream at the end that pulls everything together. And her presence relaxes the Cassavetes character enough so that he has a moment of nonverbal realization. He just laughs and laughs and laughs and laughs. And I was 6 feet away from him when he shot that. Nobody knew what he was doing. Maybe 12 feet away. And that moment kind of frees him. And he's able to say goodbye to his sister. And the ending isn't happy, isn't sad, but the character has taken a real step. You feel like something's happened within. He said, "We're making a picture about inner life." I'm quoting now. He said, "We're making a picture about inner life, and no one even knows if that can be done. So screw it." Because both characters are going through this seismic agony, and yet it's not a depressing movie. There's an opening up at the end that where you feel, you're watching for 2 hours and 20 minutes, and you feel some kind of nonverbal conclusion has been reached. And that's what he was shooting for all along. If I'm being vague, maybe you can ask me some more specific questions and I can dig in a little bit.
No, you're not being vague. Maybe give a little outline of the, I don't want to say plot, but just give an outline of the film, and what occurs in it.
Well, it's interesting because it's a good thing you didn't say plot, because John doesn't work with plot.
Right.
Orson Welles once said on the Dick Cavett show, he said, "Who needs a plot, but who can live without a story?" And John said to me, "I always tell two stories." And so here is a writer, John Harmon, Robert Harmon, living in a nice house in the hills of Los Angeles. Not a super nice house, just a house. And it's not like the house of a very rich person, just a house of well-off people. Very, as John said, that it was cheap to buy the house when they bought it. You know, Laurel Canyon was on its way to being a slum for a while. And he's a writer, and he writes about nightlife. He writes about prostitutes. He writes about gay bars. He writes nightlife. And he goes from one nightlife situation to another. His sister, who, as I said, we don't know is his sister, Sarah, is married to a very successful guy. Somewhere with a house with a pool and everything and everything and everything.
Seymour Cassell, right?
And say it again?
Seymour Cassell?
Seymour Cassell, yes,
Yeah.
played by Seymour Cassell. And who had been working with John for years. He stars in Faces. I think he got an Academy nomination for Faces. In Miriam Moskowitz. And that marriage is busted up. They have a daughter. Jenna, there's a scene in divorce court. Jenna doesn't want to give up any custody. She's kind of going against what everybody's saying. Then she goes to a therapist, who's played by her brother David. And you're seeing these, you don't know what, you're seeing these scenes of intensity, but what have they got to do with each other? These scenes of intensity, but who are these people? And there's a momentum to the filmmaking. You're watching, you're fascinated, but who are these guys? Which is very like when you meet people actually. You don't know everything about them as soon as you see them. And then they come together and you see what they mean to each other. Not because of what the feelings they show, but because of what the feelings they fight not to show. They're trying to be cool, they're trying to be this, they're trying to be that. She goes off to live it up. Where does she live it up? She's this elegant, beautiful woman. She goes to a bowling alley in the valley. I mean, you know, she's kind of off her head, and yet not. And she picks up this guy. And meanwhile, her brother is interviewing people in a gay club, doing this, doing that, aimless. And the mother of his girlfriend fascinates him. So, not in a kinky way, but they just get really drunk together, and he has a good time. Nothing happens. They don't, you know. I think they do one sort of little goodbye kiss. It's a platonic kind of situation, but it's off the wall, and you're thinking, this guy's really off the rails. He's losing it. And his sister goes off the rails and decides he needs company and buys 2 miniature horses and a dog. And that was a day when the crew really lost. What is this guy talking about? Because she comes up. No, seriously. I mean, the crew was like, you know, half the crew was Israeli, and I'm going, what is this? What's going on here? Because suddenly, Jenna pulls up in a cab, and in the cab, driven by John Finnegan, one of the wonderful character actors of his generation, a great friend of John's. John said, "We'll get Finnegan in, and he'll make the scene work," kind of thing. So, driven by John Finnegan, and the cab opens, and the door opens, and a miniature horse jumps out, and then another miniature horse in the back seat, and then Jenna. It wasn't an easy thing to shoot, and Jenna's not the kind of person you expect to be in a back seat with miniature horses. Also, a goat. There was a goat in the front seat, and a cage of chickens. I mean, it was crazy, totally crazy. And the scene is that they're bringing the goats and the horses into the house, because where else are you going to put them? And they're putting them then into the backyard. And John couldn't keep a straight face. He's dragging this horse, and he's laughing and Finnegan's saying this stuff. And the goats start doing what goats do. They're crapping little pellets. It's all very neat. It's not like mochi or anything like that. They're just crapping in these little pellets all over the living room. And this is there's some kind of normal in this. You're going, oh yeah, the goats are in the living room, sure. It's Cassavetes film. But the crew is driven up a wall. For one thing, now they got to take care of goats, horses. And they had a wrangler for that, but that wrangler was only one person. that don't seem to make sense. These people going from one thing to another, and yet every scene is believable. It's not like we're trying special effects here. No special effects in the John Cassavetes film. It's not like ghosts are going to happen and psycho killers aren't going to jump out of the bushes. It is each Robert Harmon and Sarah Harmon are on this strange journey in which they end up. There's a jukebox in the living room, of course, and they have dancing to this old song. And then she has kind of a breakdown, and yet it's a dream in which everything comes together for her. And she's going to leave. We don't know where she's going, really. And John is sitting in the front living room, and he has a vision. This guy who wouldn't have anything to do with visions or anything spiritual, he'd laugh you out of the room if you mentioned anything spiritual or metaphysical or anything like that. The way John would. But there's this dog, and instead of a dog that Jenna brought in, he sees some kind of strange man. And that's when he starts laughing. And as I say, I'm standing near the camera, and he's pointing this more or less toward the camera. He does 3 different takes of this hysterical laughter. I believe it was 3. It was more than 1. And after the first one, and nobody knows what the hell he's doing. The crew does not know. He's laughing and laughing and laughing, and like Mephistopheles even. And he calls a cut, and he says, I'll try to keep it more or less polite. He says, what the hell am I doing? Am I supposed to be doing this? What am I doing? And then he comes over to me and takes me by the shoulders with all his intensity. And he says, about the crew, they think I'm crazy. They think I don't know what I'm doing. He says, I love this picture. If you don't want to see it, don't see it. If you don't want to go to the movie theater, don't go to the movie theater. Fuck you. Then he goes and sits down and does laughing again, even more hysterically. And then, and only he knows what's going on at the moment. And maybe he doesn't even know all the way. And then there's the rain machines there, so also there's the rain pouring down. But pouring down, because he has the special storm law there. And Jenna has a scene where she comes downstairs and is lighting a cigarette, and the cigarette, he wants her to light it in a certain way. She starts getting real angry at him and says, John, I'm going to burn my hair. And he says, just do it the way I'm telling you, and all this tension. And then there's the scene where she's getting in the cab. She's going to leave. All her luggage, it won't fit in the cab. She says, just leave it. The rain's pouring down. And there's John at the window in this silly hat that got rain on his raincoat. And he has a goblet full of whiskey. And he's looking out the window. And he kind of waves. He kind of waves while the music plays and watches his sister go away. And all of this has been done like for 6 weeks in a very hot summer. And we're watching dailies one night during this whole thing. And in those days, you know, you could smoke inside and all that kind of stuff. People were passing a bottle around. I didn't drink at all that summer or that year because I'd been in the hospital. But people were passing a bottle around, and we're all smoking. And John, I happen to be sitting a seat away from John. And he stands up and he just says quietly, this is a sweet film. If I die, this is a sweet last film. And that's kind of the closing line, in a sense, in John's life. But there was another day when the dailies, the scene scene he shot that he wasn't satisfied with. He had about 8 different versions of it. He wasn't satisfied with it. He was clear we were going to do this all over again the next day. And he'd be cursing. He'd be looking at it. Not cursing the actors. Never. Always putting it on himself. You know, I didn't get this right. I'm doing this. And he stands up. And again, I'm sitting in the same row. I'm sitting so close to him. He stands up and says to nobody in particular, but for everybody to hear, well, if it was easy, anybody could do it. Which has remained for me whenever I'm in trouble in a piece of writing, whenever I feel stuck, whenever I think, what the hell am I doing with this? I think of John. If it was easy, anybody could do it.
So this
now,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
The other thing that happened on the shoot, which was very strange, about 2/3 into the shoot, Menachem Golan, comes to the set. And I'm the guy with the notebook. I'm just right there. He's been told about me, I guess. I'd never met him before. And he's paying me. I've never met him. And he and John are talking in John's little bar. And Golan says, I have these boys, they're very good, they're from Israel, and they're going to come shoot a documentary, Cassavetes. And John's saying basically, oh my God, I don't want a bunch of, come on, I don't need a bunch of amateurs tripping over the wires around here. You know, it's hard enough to do this. And Golan says, no, it'll be good, it'll be Cassavetes. And John turns to me, and I'm not sitting with them. There's the bar, they're at the bar. I'm sitting at one of the tables kind of on the other end of the room, but it's not a big room. And he says to me, have him do it. Pointing at me. Have him do it. And Golan turns around like not missing a beat. Good, you do it. I didn't even know me. Good, you do it. Go to Chris Pierce in the morning. We'll get you a cameraman. We'll get you. I want Cassavetes, not the making up. And suddenly, I'm making a film. You know that people come to this town willing to sell their left testicle or left breast to make a film. And I'm just sitting there and suddenly, you do it. I got up real early the next morning. I went to John. And I said, look, your film is more important to me than my film. If you don't want me to do this, say so. You just say no to this. And he looked at me with eyes gleaming and said, I'll give you a quick yes. Okay. I went in, and they gave me Danny Weatherby. You remember Danny Weatherby.
Yeah.
Call, editor, young editor. He'd never been first chair editor. He'd been assistant editor. And they gave me a sound guy, whose name I can't quite remember at the moment. And they gave me a wonderful cameraman, an Israeli, who truly was wonderful, and I'll remember his name in a second. In that we shot it in 16 millimeter camera, handheld, and you really can't tell when you look at the documentary. If you get the Love Streams Criterion on DVD, or Blu-ray, it includes the documentary and a good print of it. And wait a second, I'm pulling the film and getting the cameraman's name. Gideon Perath.
Right.
Giddy, called him. And he was terrific. Never got to know him personally. He was just on the gig. Also, I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
I'd never done this before. And Danny and Giddy let me make my mistakes. They knew very well in those first 2 or 3 days before I saw any daily what I was doing wrong. And I didn't. And they didn't tell me. It was kind of a thing in the film business. You let the cat make his mistakes or her mistakes, then they're going to learn if they don't from their own mistakes. And I saw in the first 3 days of dailies, oh my God, am I fucking up? Danny, what do I do here? Blah, 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 blah. I'd ask questions. I'd ask kitty questions. And we followed them around for the last 3 weeks of the picture. John gave me access to everything except the music. I had access to everything in that was going on, including some of the backstage politics kind of thing. But when it came to the music, no. Because he was doing the music with a guy that he'd worked with extensively on other pictures. A guy more or less my age. And I'm looking for his name now. Hold on, it ain't there. Bo was his first name. In any case, because as I learned later, John would get really crazy with the music. They'd go into his studio, and John would, who couldn't carry a tune, but they'd be drinking, and they'd make up songs that would only go in a John Cassavetes film. When you see Love Streams, the final song is the song they came up with. We used it in the documentary. So the summer is coming to a close. The shoot is coming to a close. I think I've outlined the film more or less the way you wanted me to.
Yeah.
Okay. And I've got all these notes. You and Jan have moved to New Mexico and then back to LA.
Yeah.
And as you remember, I lived in the editing room for like the next 2 or 3 months.
I didn't remember that. No.
No, do you remember coming to the set?
Yeah.
Yeah, good, okay. And it was that kind of thing, John would say, oh, hello, Brendan, shake your hand.
Yeah.
Take time out. So the film didn't end for me when the shoot ended. Now I had my film to edit.
Yeah.
And we looked at all the footage, and it was me and John, and me and Danny, and Dan's friend Seth Gavin. And I ran into Seth sometime later, and this was his first gig in an editing room out of film school, where, as assistant editor, we all just talked. So I had the final say. I gave Danny the final say in various parts of it. The beginning and ending montages are all Danny, they're not me. And Danny being the editor he was, and Giddy being the cinematographer he was, made me look good. And whenever we showed the film at a festival, or when we showed it to John and Jenna, we flew to New York to show it to John and Jenna when they were doing a play there, I always, and all kinds of people, Ben Gazzara came, blah, 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 all these people came to the screening room on Times Square. And John asked me to introduce the film, and I said, and I would always say, or at a festival, I'd say, and Dan Weatherby, stand up, please, Dan. I couldn't have done this without Dan. It's as much Dan's film as it is mine. It says director, and it should, but the editor was most important in this, and the cinematographer. They taught me everything I know. And so we would sit there, and once I saw all, and this is true of being a documentarist, once I saw all the footage, then I could decide what my film would be. because you make the film out of the footage you have. And that was great fun. And the interesting thing is, Golan forgot all about us. He gave me another $5,000 for doing the documentary, but he forgot all about us. And then our print, it went to we were getting the answer print. You send them. You got your edited film. You send it to the lab. They send you what they call an answer print. Now it's all electronic, of course, but they send you what you call an answer print. Is this the way you want it? You know, are the color values right? Is the sound right? Is this as good as you can get it? And on the day we got the answer print, Golan's office calls down and says, "Did you guys ever make that film?" "Yeah, we made the film. Can Golan see it?" "Yeah, he can see it whenever he wants." So he saw it by himself, and he asked his assistant to tell me that, except for John's film, it was the best film they'd made all year. And they even put it out on VHS.
Really? Huh.
Yeah. No, I've got a copy of that VHS.
Yeah.
They even put it out on VHS. And then it disappeared. Then I wrote, now we fast forward to 2004. No, I want to talk, let's very briefly. So the film is very well received in Europe. The U.S.A., as usual, doesn't know what to do with it. The American audiences. But it's recognized in Europe as for what it is. It got the Golden Bear in the German Film Festival, etc., that kind of thing. Huh. And John gets more and more ill. I get a phone call from him. This is October '88. I get a phone call from him. His voice is raspy. "Mike, come up to the house. I want to talk to you." I knew he was dying, and I was very hesitant, because death was new to me then still. Now, death is an old companion. I know so many who have died. But then death was new. And so I was hesitant, nervous. I went up to the house, and he's in bed. He had bloated enormously, except his head was like a skull. And yet a light kind of, I don't mean to be spiritual or sentimental or anything like that. Other people who saw him at the time have said the same thing. There was something angelic about his face, something sweet. He had accepted what was happening to him, and he was living it out. He said to me, looking at the ceiling and speaking of God, he said, "I don't know what he's waiting for, but I'm not going to do it for him." And he said, "They gave me 6 months. It's been 6 years."
Wow.
He said, "I got all my doctor friends." Well, they gave my sister 2 years ago. 2 years, 4.5 years ago. That happens. She's doing pretty well. But with John's cancer, it was just the cirrhosis, and it was wrecking his body. You could see it. His hands were getting kind of blue, and that's organ failure, I know now. And he said, it wasn't called the Sundance Film Festival yet. It was at Sundance, but it was called the U.S.A. Film Festival. He said, they want to do a retrospective of all my pictures. And I want you to curate it. And I'm going, any film you want in there, acting, the directing, tell them what you want, order them around. It's your show. once again, I was very honored and quite terrified. But I knew immediately what I was going to do. I wasn't dumbfounded. I was just, okay, I can do this. And I said, because he had directed one more film after Love Streams while he was ill. Peter Falk was making a comedy that wasn't working out, and he asked John to direct it, I think probably to get John out of the house. And he said, I directed that picture sitting down. It's the only picture I've ever directed sitting down. It was called Big Trouble. And I looked at him and said, not Big Trouble, right? And he just rolled his eyes and shook his head. He wouldn't even say anything. So I did not include Big Trouble. But I included everything else. Plus acting roles, Rosemary's Baby, Dirty Dozen, Fury, where we see John's head explode.
Yeah, yeah.
And the Sundance Festival happened in January, late January, was really successful. I'd never been to Sundance, haven't been since. It was early 1989. And the theaters, it was really cold. There was a lot of snow on the ground, heaps of snow. And the theaters, the showings were packed. People even sat in the aisles. The prints were great. Shadows had the best sound it ever had in its existence, better than John has ever. I said, you make them get a print, show it to you. The sound is incredible. And it was packed. It was a very, very successful showing. I got back by train. I called him as soon as I got back and told him that what I just told you. It was packed. People talked about it. Every film, people argued about them. It was wonderful. I had a couple of panels. It was a lot of talk, a lot of fun. And I had a toothache. I developed a toothache on this train ride. He said, come on over for coffee. And I said, I got to go to the dentist today and tomorrow. He said, come Wednesday. I came Wednesday. His daughter told me he was in the hospital. And Friday he died. At the memorial they had for him at the Directors Guild, everybody was there. It was all John's people. Directors, Martin Ritt, who directed John and Edge of the City, Don Siegel, who was one of John's best friends and John considered him a mentor in terms of directing. Others, Pete Falk, of course, Kazara, not Jenna. Jenna was away by herself. And one story impressed me very much. A young director whom John knew was about to do his first film. And he goes to John, knocks on the door like at 2 a.m. before he's supposed to do this first film, and says, John, how do I direct a film? I'm supposed to do this film in a few hours. How do I direct it? And John said, don't be afraid of anything or anyone. I said, yeah, I know, but John, tell me how to do it. Don't be afraid of anything or anyone. Direct your picture. And that's a big part of his legacy for filmmakers and artists of any kind. Because he was an artist.
Yeah.
He did what people thought could not be done, because when he started making films, there wasn't an independent film movement. There was nobody that could help him. There was nobody that could, he was this crazy guy directing a film in New York. And on top of that, the film was about black people and white people who wanted to see that. And supposedly it was improvised. actually, they had worked out these scenes in improvisation. When the scenes were shot, they were scenes that had been worked out. There wasn't a script, but they had been worked out. And then the film had gotten noticed at the Venice Film Festival, and the film affected Fellini, and the film affected the great Japanese director, Kurosawa.
Yeah.
Kurosawa. Both their styles changed a little after they saw Shadows.
Huh.
Became more realistic. Didn't depend so much on... Well, Fellini had been kind of improvisatory from the beginning, but didn't depend so much on conventions. Camera movement changed some. And here's this guy who did this. And then he did it again, and then he did it again, and again, and again. I may have told you the story already, but it's worth repeating what is really the end of this John discussion, is that they were about to film A Woman on the Influence. His starting date was Monday. It was Friday. And his people come to him and say, and his people, we're talking about, 5 or 6. We're not talking about he's got this enormous crew or something. I said, John, we don't have any film. Everything's set up, but we don't have any film. And we don't have the money to buy any film. And John said, we're going to shoot Monday. John, I'm telling you, we don't have any film. And John said, I don't care if there's film in the cameras or not. We're shooting Monday. And because he meant that, somehow they found the film.
Yeah.
And A Woman of the Influence got shot. But I have no doubt that he would have set those people up in front of empty cameras to start it.
Yeah, as we were talking about love streams, it occurred to me that it sounds like a producer's nightmare, right? Or did
of course.
was the deal that was Menachem thinking, okay, I'm gonna make a John Cassavetes movie, I have to just expect it to be a nightmare? Is that how it's approached?
Well, basically, they let it be Al Rubin's nightmare.
Okay.
I mean, it was a producer's nightmare, but it was Al Rubin's nightmare. I mean, things would happen like suddenly there was construction sound. The second day I was on the set, which is John's house, of course. There was construction sound. John sends to find out what it is. These guys are going to be working construction for the next 4 weeks. You can't shoot the movie with construction sound in the background for 4 weeks. John looks at Al and says, fix it. We don't know how, but Al fixed it. Al Rubin is that kind of person.
Yeah.
So Menachem didn't worry about the nightmare. They didn't balk about the money, because after all, it was an inexpensive film. It was mainly on one set. Plus, stolen shots. They didn't get license to shoot here or license to shoot there. They just shot, except for the quote unquote opera scenes that happened in the Pasadena theater. So it was Al's nightmare. Plus, he's shooting the film. So, there's a sense once you start thinking about John Cassavetes' sly Greek ways, if Al is worried about shooting the film and really putting his artistic mark on it, then he's not going to worry so much about the production until the shoot is over and you've got to pay the bills and stuff. And Golan left him completely alone. The second time he showed up on the set, he showed up so that I could photograph him. He wanted to be in the picture with John. The only thing I was told about the documentary by his exec producer, Chris Pierce, was whatever else you do, get John and Golan in the same frame talking. Well, that was easy. Menachem came to the set. They're in the bar, and there we are, and they're talking, and it was very funny because John was playing. It was like Golan was the big brother, and John was the mischievous little brother. And Golan stops at one point in the conversation, and says, "Are we shooting?" Because they'd just been in the bar for an hour. That's not what he came to see. And John says, "Yeah, they're setting up." And Golan says, "Oh, it's one of those nights." and finally left and didn't see any of the shooting, which is exactly what John wanted.
Yeah.
But so, on the one hand, it was a producer's nightmare, but on the other hand, the producer and the producer's spies were not allowed on the set, not from autocratic viewpoint. Just that John welcomed everybody on a set. He just wasn't going to shoot while you were there. So they were left alone. I was left alone to make the documentary. It was quite extraordinary, as you point out. Really. It was. Yes.
What film did he make previous to Love Streams? The Bookie?
No, the Bookie was 1977.
Yeah.
He made. He acted with Jenna in the Paul Mazursky film The Tempest.
Yeah.
He made Jenna's film opening night. Gloria.
Oh, he directed Gloria.
Yeah, he directed Gloria.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
And Gloria at the time was a very, now you got all these women hitters. You got Atomic Blonde, you got Hunger Games. For 20 years now, you've had a lot of that. Gloria was one of the only movies that you can point to before Xena and Buffy opened up that whole thing in the 90s. With that kind of a heroine. Jenna's the hero. They're the gangsters and all this, and she's been a gangster's mom, but she's not going to let them kill the kid. And she doesn't even like kids. But she's not going to let them kill them. So he directed Gloria. He wrote and directed Gloria. And opening night was before that, 78. A beautiful, really wonderful film that absolutely died at the box office. And Killing of a Chinese Bookie was before that, and that didn't even really play. There are two versions of Killing of a Chinese Bookie. And it's kind of a tortured film.
Yeah.
And it opened for a few days in LA and a few days in New York, and that was that. And the film before that was A Woman Under the Influence, which did get a lot of distribution and Academy Award nominations and all that.
How did Cassavetes feel about Killing of a Chinese Bookie?
Well, I have this story from Ben Gazzara, and I believe it is. It's from a documentary somebody did that I saw clips of. There's a scene where Gazzara, who is who runs a strip club and is in debt to the mob, and they want him to kill a Chinese bookie. So Gazzara is being driven in a limo or a cab, and John is operating the camera on the floor of the back seat of the limo or cab. I think it's a limo. And he's shooting the scene himself. And Gazzara said, that suddenly John just started to cry. Not boo-hoo, 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 but just, how a man sometimes cries. And says something like, you do your best to make something that you think is beautiful. Maybe it's not beautiful, but you think it's beautiful when you do it. And then the dogs come and tear it to shreds. Kind of thing. That's not a direct quote, but there's that kind of sentiment. For the most part, John was tough in the sense of he knew that he was giving it everything he had, and he knew he was doing something important. He knew he had something to say, and it was worth saying, and he was saying it in a completely different way that sooner or later people would pick up on. He had faith in his films. And he also knew the business, I mean, that he wasn't going to get thanked for it. He was going against the critics. He was going against what people expected of film. And I think it mattered to him very, very much when Shadows and other pictures started coming out that people like Fellini and Kurosawa, in fact, there's a photograph of John at John's house of Fellini and Bergman and Kurosawa and John.
Huh.
And they were in the same league. He knew what league he was playing in, and he knew that to do that in this super commercial business, in this super commercial place,
yeah,
you were going to pay dues.
Yeah, I want to.
Question of, yeah.
I want to ask you, how did he fit into Hollywood, and if the studios had an impression of him or an opinion of him? I mean, I guess obviously they thought he would be difficult to work with, right?
Well, after Shadows got so much publicity, a studio hired him to make a picture that was called Too Late Blues with Bobby Darin and somebody else. Shirley Jones, maybe. I can't remember exactly. Now, in the Bronx, when I was still living there and had no idea being a film critic or anything else, I saw it on a late show, but, it was, I kind of tuned in too late to see who was in it. But there was Bobby Darin, and there was this actress, and I thought it was wonderful. It was crazy. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. But it did about $10 worth of box office, totally disappeared. I didn't realize I was watching a John Cassavetes film until much later. I put it in the festival. Then he made A Child Is Waiting with Judy Garland and Burt Lancaster that happened at they would call it a home then, a facility now for retarded children. And he really used the retarded children. They were really in his cut of the film. They were the point of the film for him. The studio took it away from him. They recut it. When he saw it, he told me, I have this straight from him. Now, John exaggerates some. So, if this is exaggerated, it's his exaggeration, it ain't mine. He said he ran to the screen, banged his head against the screen, tore the screen. You're in a screening room, it's not a great big thing. And they fired him, and he was still getting acting work. Then he makes Faces, and again, Faces got an Academy Award nomination for the script. I think Seymour and I think the leading actress, Jenna had a part in that, but not the leading part. Were Academy Award nominations. Everybody recognizes this was a very special film. And on the strength of that, Columbia Pictures financed Husbands. And then there wasn't any money for A Woman Under the Influence, and he didn't have any real money to make a film again until Love Streams, or Gloria, and then Love Streams. So when you say what place did he have, there were critics I like David Thompson, who I respect tremendously, who refused to admit that A Woman Under the Influence was even a movie. Said so. I don't even say this is a movie. And there were a lot of people in Hollywood, Steven Spielberg, Don Siegel, etc., who respected the hell out of John. If you look at the director's cut, the deluxe version of Close Encounters of the First Kind, and you see not in the original cut, but in the director's cut, the fights between
Dreyfus and Terry Garr.
Yeah. And you look at the marriage scene,
right?
They're straight out of John Cassavetes.
Yeah.
and so Hollywood, people like Spielberg, people like who was on the set of Faces for a couple of days. People with a good eye, they could see what John was doing, and they could see that. The studio guys, John told me, I used to think, what are these guys, crazy? These guys, can't they see? And, as the years went by, I got to know some of these guys better. They're doing the best they can. They're in the business. They're doing the best they can. This wasn't something that they could understand. What they understand is money, and it wasn't something that was going to make them money. They didn't know why they were doing it.
Yeah. So is he
kind of thing?
Is he financing Woman Under the Influence out of his acting roles?
Yeah. If you want to see an interesting film, take a look at Machine Gun McCain.
Yeah. I know the movie. Yeah.
With John Cassavetes and Peter Falk. And there is a remarkable scene with Jenna. A scene that could be in a 10 times better film. And so the three of them, maybe the money for, I don't know for sure, but certainly all three of them got paid well, and it didn't cost much to make A Woman Under the Influence.
Yeah, and he must have gotten paid pretty well from Fury, too. That was a big studio picture.
He was a top actor. You know? Rosemary's Baby, Fury, Dirty Dozen, they were big films.
Yeah.
And he was he wasn't the star, but he was definitely the co-star. And definitely noticeable. I mean, the thing John had as an actor is that he never played to be liked. He played the role just straight ahead, the way he saw the role. And if you didn't like it if you didn't like the character, too bad.
Yeah, he's great in the Fury.
So he made a great villain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, he's terrific.
No. Mikey and Nikki is an interesting movie that he didn't direct it, but it's very Cassavetes-esque though.
Yeah, Elaine May wrote that and directed it.
Right.
In a time when there were very few women directors, almost none. And I remember I interviewed, when it was being reissued in the early 80s, I interviewed Peter Falk for it. And I remember saying to Peter, so there are people who think this movie was improvised.
Yeah.
And Peter Falk looked at me with horror on his face, and he said, "What are they, crazy? You think you can improvise work like this?"
Yeah.
But that's a powerful movie.
Yeah, it is. It's.
I mean that is a strange movie.
Yeah, it's an extremely ugly film, but very captivating. I don't mean ugly as filmmaking, but the subject that it's portraying is extremely unsettling and ugly, and the people are just awful people. and
Yes.
but it's a great movie, and it's genuine. Yeah.
Well, and this is at a time when everybody is swooning over Godfather 2.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah.
And
right.
Elaine May and John and Peter come along and say, actually, this is what's much more
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
You don't want to know these people.
Yeah.
You know, this is what you do to your best friend.
Yeah. And these guys, his milieu, Gazzara, Falk, and him, these are very urban people. These are not people that have ever gone camping. They don't like silence, and these are city guys, and they're initiated to the city, and I think that's important to. It's an important part of not just the films he directed, but like films like Mikey and Nicky, and it's a certain generation of urban men. Yeah, and
very much so.
Did any of those guys were any of those guys in World War II?
I think they were all too young for World War II,
right?
Just barely.
I think Gazzara was in Korea.
John was in the army. I don't think he got to Korea, but he was in the army for sure.
Yeah.
Peter had that eye, so I doubt he was in the army.
You're right. Yeah. No, I know he wasn't in World War II. Yeah. But do you think that affected movies like Husbands, for instance, that there was a certain generation of guys that were like just too young to be in World War II, and that had some effect on the kind of men they turned out to be, like a kind of frustration.
Oh, I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
I was about 17 years younger than John, and we both grew up in New York City. I even grew up in some neighborhoods he lived in 17 years after he lived in them. And when I hit the workforce, when I was 18 years old, 18 years old, almost every older guy I worked with was a veteran of World War II or Korea. And there was a certain atmosphere of those guys. And, you know, my father was in the Army in World War II. He didn't see combat. But they were training him to learn Swedish and parachute into Finland when the war was over. Just as the war was over. My Uncle Sal was in the he was in the Battle of the Bulge, and in an outfit that was one of the first to liberate concentration camps. My Uncle Jack was in it too. I don't know how. I don't remember. Only my Uncle Hugo wasn't in it because he had a physical infirmity. My other uncles were in it. My Uncle Aldo, my mother's brother, was at Los Alamos trying to make the atom bomb. And I know when I worked at the ad agency in Boston when I was about 26, one of the ad executives and almost the entire art department were Korea War veterans. And 2 or 3 of them had adopted Korean orphans, which is something that apparently was a lot of Korean War veterans adopted Korean orphans. You know, a strange percentage of them did. So, to your question, and when I was working in New York City as a transcriber and a typesetter, there was a guy, Marty Ring. He was with the 101 at the Battle of the Bulge and liberating concentration camps. And I remember he said to me, "I believe that crap they talk about the war, Mike. You're either scared shit or bored shit. That's war."
Yeah.
So that was the whole atmosphere. You're very right. Of that generation of people who were in the war and who just missed the war, and the awareness you had growing up like 1974 did not have was that you were signing up for the draft. You were going to get drafted. You know, your name was going to come up. And people were going to ask you to do this, and you on pain of imprisonment or whatever if you didn't. That was an atmosphere that since the early 70s, American men haven't had to live with. American boys. You know, you knew you were going to get tagged. I had a hardship deferment because I was supporting my mother and my brothers and my sister, but otherwise I would have been very eligible. And, you know, big boy and others who went.
Do you think that there was a kind of trying to prove themselves type of thing with those guys that had just missed World War II? Trying
I think that was there.
Toughness.
I think that was probably an element.
Yeah.
Just human, you know.
Yeah.
Especially with World War II, because everybody felt they were fighting the bad guys. Right. And so it felt like a war that needed to be fought. But especially with World War II, wanting to get into the action, kind of being sorry that the war was over because you couldn't join up. I mean, because, you know, men are crazy that way. And I thought of joining up early in the 60s, proving myself, join the Marines. You know, and if I was thinking of it, then everybody was thinking of it one way or another.
I thought about it too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
One last thing about Cassavetes, I wanted to talk about television a little bit, and and his experience in television, and he had his own show for a little while, right?
Johnny Staccato.
Yeah.
Which is what I used to call him. Hey, Johnny Staccato. and yeah, he played a jazz pianist who was also a private detective.
Yeah.
And I saw one that was on YouTube or something where Jenna was in it. She was in a fancy leopard leotard, like for the whole show. She wore it. She was absolutely stunning. She must have been about 24. I can't remember the plot, but there they were, John and Jenna, having just met. You could just feel the fire. And it was a successful show, but John wanted out of it. And he did all kinds of crazy things to make sure that he was never going to work in television again.
Really?
Of course, he did work sometimes. Like one of the best Columbos is a Cassavetes.
Yeah.
But quite rarely. Well, like Peter Falk and Ben Gazzara had a show in the 60s. I can't remember the name of it exactly. I didn't watch it. And Peter Falk had a wonderful show called The Trials of O'Brien that didn't last a full season, but it was a terrific show. This is almost a decade before Columbo. And he had an Emmy-winning show that was like a Hallmark Hall of Fame kind of show, where they'd have hour or hour and a half long shows,
right,
just for the drama, called The Price of Tomatoes, where he plays a truck driver. If you can find it, you'll see what I mean. It is really, really good. And it made Peter Falk. It was what made everybody notice Peter Falk.
Where did all those guys? Where did those guys meet? Did they meet doing on the stage in New York? Is that
where they were all New Yorkers?
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know the story of how Peter and John met. I know that half halfway into Husbands, Peter swore he'd never work with John again. Yeah, John was driving him crazy, and yet, they made one. Then there was Woman. Then Peter makes a cameo appearance in Opening Night, but I don't know where they met. But I do think that the experience of Husbands made them all close.
Yeah.
And they knew. It was like as actors they were playing for the same stakes. And they were very fearless in their roles. They weren't afraid to look ridiculous. They weren't afraid to, emotionally strip down, not in some kind of method, crybaby kind of way, but just you're seeing a guy. There's the guy with all the warts, with all the faults.
Yeah. Do you think that you've seen Saint Jack by Bogdanovich, right? That must have been influenced by Cassavetes some.
I think so. Well, Bogdanovich was a friend of John's.
Yeah.
And
it's like a polished Cassavetes film almost.
Yeah. And
not as chaotic.
And you know that Bogdanovich directed a scene in Love Streams, don't you?
No, I didn't know that.
Well, Diane Abbott was very gracious about having her character totally lopped off after the first 20 minutes of the film. Yeah. And having her big scene with John Cassavetes, not shot even, but she wrote a little scene just to tie up her character. And we're toward the end of the shoot, and John has invited Peter to come over, have breakfast, something like that. And Peter comes, and John says, "So Diane wrote these pages," and Peter says, "You're going to shoot it?" And John said, "Who am I not to shoot it? She cared enough to write it. I'll shoot it. We'll see what happens." Then John says, "Do you want to shoot it?" And Peter says, "You want me to shoot it?" "Yeah, why don't you shoot it? I haven't directed a film in a couple of years. Now you shoot it." "Okay, let me make some calls and I'll shoot it." And suddenly, the crew has a new boss, and Peter was completely relaxed. And he said, "Let's read the scene. Let's read it." And John said, "You do that?" I said, "Yeah, I do it. Let's go and read the scene." Because John never does that. And so they read through the scene. I'm there with my notebook. They read through the scene. And then very impressively, Peter says, kind of impressed me, he said, "We'll have to paint the doorbell. It blends into the wood now. We have to paint it so that it doesn't blend into the wood and then dry the paint." John tells somebody to do that. And I'm thinking, pretty good. Pretty good. What an eye.
Yeah.
And Peter set up the scene, and I'm sitting on John's sitting on a wind machine fan and dangling his legs like Huck Finn on a pier, and I'm standing right next to him. So he's up sitting on the fan, and I'm in front of the fan, and we're watching Peter direct this woman, Diane Abbott, coming to the front door, and the crew is feeling completely differently. They're all kind of just workmanlike, and okay, Peter's director now, fine. and Peter calls a cut, and he's looking, and he walks back and forth a little bit, and John says to me, "The loneliness of the director."
Well, I'm glad I brought up Bogdanovich.
and at the end of the film, he thanks Peter Bogdanovich.
Okay, well, we've been talking for an hour and a half now, so
Okay.
I guess.
Okay, that's a good one to end on.
Yeah, it's a good one to end on. Okay, all right.
Loneliness of the director.
Stop here.